"You're just an old man clinging to mothballs and myths," she scoffed, right before she struck the match, her fingers trembling, not from fear, but anticipation. As flames leapt hungrily across the sleeves of the uniform he'd worn into war and walked out of with bones intact and friends buried. He didn't shout, didn't flinch, just stared at the burning cloth like it was a funeral pyre, not for fabric, but for memory, and in that moment, as smoke curled toward the fluorescent lights of the thrift store ceiling, everything she thought was just decoration suddenly felt like a mistake too big to undo. And exactly 7 minutes later, the fire chief walked in, not to extinguish flames, but to deliver a reckoning. If you believe respect for service should never go up in smoke, like and subscribe, because this isn't just about a uniform, it's about the moment someone learned what real honor costs. It started on a Saturday morning, Memorial Day weekend, in a thrift store on Main Street that still had hand-lettered signs in the windows and a faded American flag tacked crooked above the checkout counter, the kind of place where time moved slower. Where stories were tucked into the sleeves of old trench coats and vintage records whispered of better days. Harlan Briggs, 84, shuffled in with his cane tapping slow rhythms across the floor, holding a black garment bag with both hands as if it were something sacred, and in his mind, it was. Inside was his army dress blues, folded with precision, with 3 medals pinned where no one had looked in decades, a Bronze Star, a combat infantry badge, and a ribbon from the chosen reservoir. Though only a handful of men alive even knew what that was anymore. Harlan wasn't there to boast. He was there to donate. Figured someone might want to display it, he said softly to Marie, the owner, who blinked at the offer like he'd handed her the moon in a Ziploc bag. She placed it gently in the window, flanked by faded campaign posters and a wooden crate full of war novels, and for a few hours, it sat in peace. Then Jessica Caldwell walked in, loud, streaming live on her phone, demanding that the uniform be removed. "This glorifies violence," she said, spinning for the camera, her followers tossing emojis like gasoline in the comments. "It's disgusting. Parading trauma like it's heroism." Harlan, seated quietly near the bookshelf, just blinked. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "that uniform isn't about war. It's about remembering the ones who didn't come back." She laughed. "You think your costume gives you moral ground? My grandfather was drafted. He hated the military. Said it broke people and spit them out." Harlan didn't argue. He just looked at her, long enough to unsettle her smile. He wasn't wrong, Harlan said. It did break people. But some still chose to walk back in for others. That should have ended it. But it didn't. Jessica left and returned 20 minutes later with a small metal flask, her phone still recording, her voice performative and mocking. "Let's cleanse this shrine, shall we?" Before Marie could stop her, before anyone understood what was happening, she doused the uniform with lighter fluid and struck a match. Harlan stood. Not fast, not angry, just steady. "Don't," he said. But she already had. The flame caught instantly, curling up the sleeves, licking across the metal pins until the metal hissed and blackened. Someone screamed. Marie grabbed the fire extinguisher. A customer dialed 911. Harlan didn't move. He just stared at it, like a man watching a casket lower into the ground. And then, precisely 7 minutes later, the sirens came. The fire was out by then, mostly smoke and scorched memory. But the doors burst open with a gust of wind and boots hit the tile with deliberate purpose. Fire Chief Raymond Malone stepped in, helmet under his arm, silver bars on his collar gleaming like judgment. His eyes scanned the room and landed not on the damage, but on Harlan. He crossed the room without a word and snapped the salute that made the air crackle. Harlan gave a faint nod. Jessica snorted, still holding her phone. "Really?" "For him." Chief Malone turned. "Ma'am," he said coldly, "that man dragged me out of a burning Jeep on Hill 585 in 1951. I had shrapnel in my chest and no pulse for 22 seconds. That uniform you burned? It had my blood on it." The room fell silent. Jessica lowered her phone, finally off balance. "You have no idea what you did," he continued, voice low but carrying. "You didn't torch a costume. You torched history. And that man's earned more honor in silence than you'll find screaming into a phone." He turned to Harlan, took a folded bundle from his duffel bag, and unwrapped it carefully. A pristine army jacket. Malone's spare. "It's not yours," he said softly. "But it should be." Harlan hesitated, hands trembling as he touched the cloth. "Don't do this for me," he whispered. "Do it for them." Malone nodded. "I already did." Jessica tried to leave, but the police were already outside. Charges pending. Marie posted the footage. And by sundown, the clip had spread across the country. 1,000 comments. 10,000 shares. And one sentence that was repeated again and again. She thought it was just fabric. She didn't know it still bled. They said she didn't mean it. That it was just a statement, a protest, a symbolic gesture. But symbols don't smell like burning wool and metal polish, and apologies don't come after you live-streamed yourself grinning next to a smoking heap of someone else's sacrifice. The footage hit 400,000 views by dawn. Jessica Caldwell's video, once smug, sarcastic, performative, now felt like evidence. Not art. Not commentary. Evidence. The comment section had turned. First with questions. Then with fury. Wait, that was real? You burned a veteran's uniform? That guy's a chosen survivor. What the hell is wrong with you? But Jessica didn't back down. She doubled down, posting a shaky-eyed clarification in front of a black screen, claiming Harlan Briggs was exploiting old myths to glorify nationalism, that no one in a thrift store should be holding sacred anything related to war, and calling the fire chief's salute an act of propaganda. The video was up for 11 minutes, and then it vanished, because someone had sent it to WCB Channel 5, and before Jessica could delete her social media presence, the story had already gone national. She wasn't just trending. She was toast. But Harlan didn't speak. Not once. Not to the local news fans outside the store the next morning. Not to the mayor who called asking if he'd attend the restorative unity vigil. Not even to the uniformed veterans who stopped by to shake his hand with mist in their eyes. He simply sat on the bench outside Marie's thrift store, same bench he'd sat on for years to sip his afternoon tea, wearing the borrowed jacket from Chief Malone. The medals gently pinned in place by the steady hand of a man who'd once held his dying sergeant's wrist for 47 minutes under mortar fire. When reporters asked what he wanted, Harlan said nothing. But when the fire chief returned that Sunday, he said plenty. "You can stay quiet, Harlan," Malone said, pulling out a folded document from a weathered leather folder. "But the rest of us? We won't." It was a letter from the Department of Defense, confirming Harlan Briggs' Distinguished Service Cross had been approved in 1952 but never delivered due to administrative misrouting and later lost in inactive archives. It had been rediscovered by a Pentagon historian just 3 months prior, and they'd tried to find Harlan, only to discover no one had ever submitted his file to the VA. Malone handed him the citation. Harlan stared at it for a long time. Then, took him long enough. He smiled, just a little. But word spreads fast in small towns. And 2 days later, the fire station hosted a gathering not official, not a ceremony, just a cookout on the back lot, with folding chairs and American flags taped to cinder block walls, and a line of people, young and old, who came not for hot dogs, but to put hands on Harlan's shoulder and say what should have been said 70 years ago. "Thank you. I didn't know. I see you now." Even Cadet Morris, the high school ROTC kid who used to laugh at Harlan's slow walk, stood quietly and offered him a new shadow box. "Build it in shop class, sir. For your real medals this time." But Jessica? She wasn't there. She was at City Hall, being escorted out of her own community panel by 2 police officers and a city attorney, after refusing to issue a written apology and trying to file a cease and desist against the fire department for character defamation. But there's a difference between character and clout, and the town had already chosen. In the back room of the firehouse, beside a dusty flag from Operation Enduring Freedom, Chief Malone stood before the mayor, 2 council members, and the editor of the local newspaper. "You don't get to pretend this didn't happen," Malone said. "You don't get to shove this under some reconciliation hashtag and hope it disappears." He turned the iPad toward them, playing Jessica's original livestream. The flames. The laughter. The line. "He thinks it matters. Let's show him it doesn't." The silence in the room thickened. "She tried to erase a man's legacy," Malone said quietly. "But she only revealed how deep it goes." That same night, the town's council voted, unanimously, to declare the bench outside Marie's thrift store as a permanent memorial post. A plaque would be placed. A small flagpole installed. The inscription would read simply, "For those who stood quietly while the world forgot, and still chose to serve again." But the best moment came 3 days later. The air was thick with pollen. Kids biked down cracked sidewalks. Harlan, back on the bench, nodded at passersby. And then a small girl, a stranger, maybe 7, stepped up, shy and unsure, holding a crayon drawing of a soldier and a fire truck. "My daddy said you saved people," she whispered. "This is for you." Harlan blinked hard. He took the drawing with both hands, looked at the red and green squiggles, and whispered back, "He's right. But only 'cause they saved me too." And somewhere, just outside the shot, Jessica Caldwell sat alone in a room that had once broadcast her voice to thousands, and now echoed nothing but silence. They thought the story would end quietly, like most veteran stories do, some symbolic plaque. A news cycle buried under the next outrage, a few solemn handshakes and forgotten salutes. But Harlan Briggs wasn't a headline. And what Jessica Caldwell set on fire wasn't just his uniform, it was a fuse, and the town wasn't going to let it burn out. The dedication of the bench-turn memorial wasn't televised, but someone's teenage niece recorded it on her phone, a shaky vertical video that started with folding chairs under a modest tent and ended with 500,000 shares in 3 days. There was no stage, no podium, just Harlan, sitting with his cane balanced across his lap, looking smaller than the attention around him, until Chief Malone stepped forward with something no one expected, a sealed box wrapped in fire-retardant cloth, labeled simply property of Captain Harlan Briggs, retrieved, 1951, chosen sector. It was in Fort Devon's archive all these years, Malone said, his voice thick. Turns out your gear got shipped back, but never processed. They found it last week after someone in D.C. made some noise. Harlan didn't speak at first. He just opened the box slowly, like it might still be warm from history. Inside were torn dog tags, a folded journal wrapped in oilskin, and a second uniform jacket, faded, patched, but unmistakably real. The same one he'd worn through blizzards and gunfire and the night he carried 3 wounded men across a frozen river with nothing but a rope and grit. The crowd stood still as Harlan lifted it with shaking hands, then slowly stood. This one, he said, voice quiet but sure, still smells like smoke. Not the kind that hurts, but the kind that saves. There was a moment, one heartbeat long, where no one moved. And then, as if on instinct, every firefighter in the back row raised their hand in salute. Not just for the man, but for the reminder, not all fire destroys, some fire reveals. Jessica Caldwell, meanwhile, was facing her own reckoning. The town's prosecutor, under pressure from veterans groups across the country, filed formal charges for destruction of private property and reckless endangerment. Civil suits followed. Sponsors dropped her. Her podcast was pulled from every major platform within 72 hours. And still, she wouldn't apologize, not really. Not until the judge, a retired Navy commander with 3 deployments under his belt, ordered her to complete 300 hours of community service at the local VA hospital. That was where she saw her first amputee vet push his wheelchair down a hallway while humming to himself. Where she delivered lunch trays to men who wore no rank but carried entire histories in the lines of their faces. Where, one morning, she found a shelf of uniforms on display behind glass, untouched and protected. And in the middle of the row, beneath a hand-lettered sign that read, "Recovered with honor," was a single scorched jacket, half-burned, but framed like scripture. The name tag was gone, but the inscription beside it wasn't. It read, "Forgive the flame." It didn't know who it touched. That was when she cried. But not in the performative way she used to. Quietly. Alone. Still, Harlan never asked for vengeance. He never asked for anything. That was the part that baffled people the most. He never went online. Never posted. Never told anyone what to say on his behalf. He just sat on that bench each afternoon, sipping his tea, nodding to every passing kid who offered him a salute, returning each one with a ghost of a smile. It was only after his final hospital visit, 6 months later, pneumonia in his lungs and a nurse at his side, that people learned what he had done behind the scenes. Tucked beneath his mattress at the VA was a manila folder, labeled in his tidy block handwriting, "Legacy, not apology." Inside were application forms, not lawsuits, but scholarships. One for trade school, one for fire science, one for a military kid whose parent never came home. All funded anonymously. All signed, in memory of those who burned quietly. The day he passed, they didn't lower a flag. They raised one. Not half-mast, but high. The fire station sirens rang once, not for alarm, but tribute. Chief Malone gave the eulogy. He never yelled. He never demanded. But somehow, he left more behind than most generals. And the final moment, the one no one will forget, was when Cadet Morris, now in his senior year and heading to the Air Force, stood at the bench with a small box in his hands. He opened it. Inside was the scorched metal that survived the thrift store fire, fused to its bar but still legible. Morris held it up, then placed it gently on the bench, whispering, "They couldn't burn what you were. Just proved it mattered." The camera caught it all. Someone uploaded it to a tribute page called Ashes That Built Us. And the caption said only this: "She lit a match. He lit a legacy,